Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I'm the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded. Today, we have Dr. Diamond Rashad, who is a neurodivergent pediatric occupational therapist in Georgia, who collaborates with parents by connecting perinatal and pediatric health, as well as mental health, socio-emotional development, and overall child development. She holds value in supporting parents to pour into themselves too, to raise resilient and empowered children, and to celebrate diversity in neurotypes. I'm really excited about having Dr. Diamond Rashad on today's show, as this is our first occupational therapist. So I hope you enjoyed today's show and learned something new. Today's show is sponsored by the Autism in Black virtual conference happening June 24th through the 26th. You can go to www.autisminblack.org/conference22 to learn more about the conference and to register. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. Today we have a very special guest, and I know you guys know I say this for at the intro of every podcast, but I always feel like all of my guests are super special, and I'm very excited to have Dr. Diamond here today, who is a occupational therapist. We've never had one on the show, so we are going to be diving deep into some of those things that you all want to know. Hi, Dr. Diamond, and welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being on the podcast. So I've already read your bio, but can you tell the people more about yourself and what you do and maybe what exactly an OT is?
Yes, sure. So I am Dr. Diamond Rashad. I am from Savannah, Georgia, and I have been practicing as an occupational therapist for 5 years, working in pediatrics. So working within the community, early intervention for those little ones from 0 to 3 years old, and then also in the clinic. And so an occupational therapist is someone who uses everyday activities or occupations. And for children, that would be play, self-care, as in dressing, sleeping, eating, taking care of yourself, and social participation in their environment, with their community, and with their peers. And we use those occupations to help either gain independence or gain more participation in that area through play and through those activities that are really meaningful for the family. So that's a little bit about OT. I love to travel. I'm a proud auntie, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So I know a lot of times in the school system, one of the things that they add in is OT, and parents are so unsure of exactly what is done. And I know that you focus specifically on pediatrics and also that early intervention phase, which everybody is always talking about. Early intervention matters. So when it comes to occupational therapy and early intervention, what should parents know?
So when it comes to early intervention, it's important to know that they have it available in every state. And so it's something that you can get as a resource in the community. If you have concerns, you can contact the organization. The name varies depending on the state, but you can contact them directly. If you are talking to your doctor and you have concerns, and maybe you don't feel heard, or maybe they're telling you to wait and see a few months, but you really want to look at it now, you can talk to someone a part of that organization, and they can get you set up with an intake coordinator to get you started and just start to get some answers. Another thing about early intervention, and I know a lot of people talk about this, but it's important to know that early intervention also helps because it gives you more time. More therapy isn't always the best answer, but having a chance to start early and have time to process what's going on, whether your child has characteristics of autism or characteristics of sensory processing differences that make it difficult to like engage in play or engage in activities that are helpful for their development. It gives you more time to process that and gives you more time to create a team before a child gets to school and adds on that extra layer. So the second part about early intervention is that it also gives you more time. And so past the part of being able to have access to these services, you're able to see if a kid has characteristics of autism or if they have sensory processing differences. It gives you more time to figure out the best way to support them, how to change their environment, how to learn how they best learn before they get to pre-K, before they get to school, and you have that extra layer of demand. So that's another reason why early intervention can be really helpful.
Perfect. And when it comes to OT and early intervention, what can that difference be like for a child who gets that early intervention with OT and a child who doesn't?
So the difference can be, there's a lot of possibilities. And so OTs can look at how a child processes their environment. So whether that is vision, taste, what they hear, how their body feels on the outside, how their body feels on the inside, like as far as digestion or how they feel hot and cold, things like that. So processing their environment, also fine motor skills and how they do with getting dressed, how they do with bringing a spoon to their mouth. And then as far as play skills, that would be how a parent and a child or how a child and their sibling play together, and a parent learning how the kid likes to play and how they can have greater connection that way, greater emotional connection that way. And so having the chance to start early with those skills, one, I'll give you an example for feeding. If you start early with feeding a kid that perhaps has some restrictive diet issues, you have more time to figure out, okay, they have a really hard time with this texture, or they really love this color food. And so you have more time to expand that diet and find out, if there's any underlying reasons why they don't want to eat certain foods. Same thing with like dressing. If you have a hard time with tags, you have more time to adjust. So the difference is that one kid that's had OT early, they get to school, they figured out, okay, they might need time at the park beforehand. They might need to wear seamless socks or seamless undershirts without tags so they feel comfortable all day. And they might need time to wind down and have some sensory time afterwards, or have these visual supports when they're in pre-K or in kindergarten. Versus another kid who has never had OT go straight to kindergarten, straight to first grade, doesn't get any visual support, doesn't get any sensory accommodations, but still have the same struggles or same differences. Now they're internalizing it and feeling like, oh, why can't I do this? Why do I feel so frustrated all the time? The parents feel like, why can't we get them from point A to point B without being frustrated, without being overwhelmed? And so having that time to have those accommodations also teaches that child that there's nothing wrong with them. There's a reason behind those things, and they have support, and they have the chance to have their environment adapted so that they can be the best person that they want to be.
I love that. I just love the fact that you stated about knowing what some of those struggles will be and how that, that they can accommodate themselves. And I think it's important to do that prior to getting into school, because as we all know, sometimes it's very difficult to get OT services within the school system. I know for my daughter, she literally made the cutoff by a point, but we knew that she really needed her OT services in the school system. But having outside OT services before she got in there was made a leg up for us, because we were able to advocate for that for her, and the processes wasn't as long as for, say, someone like my son who didn't have the OT services prior to starting school. So we had to do a lot of heavy advocating and finding out, what exactly worked for him within the school system. There was a lot of trial and error regarding his accommodations for sensory and things of that nature. So I love that you say make sure to know those things before entering school if you can. Also, what should parents be looking out for? Like, how would I know if my child needed an OT?
That's a great question. So some ways that you might indicate or might have concerns that would fall within the scope of occupational therapy would be looking at one, milestones. The second thing would be how do they engage with how different activities within the home. So how do they do with dressing, feeding, grooming, and not just can they do it themselves, but for example, if you have a younger one and they have a hard time with having their hair brushed, if they have a hard time with having their toothbrush or their diaper change, and you start to notice a pattern of a kid avoiding or seeking out a lot of input in their environment or sensation in their environment. So for some kids, they might avoid the toothbrush, or others might put everything in their mouth. So having those kids that seek out a lot of input, a lot of sensation, or kids that don't really seek out a lot or feel overwhelmed really easy by it, that is one reason why you should seek out OT, and that's an area that we can help in. And the second one would be emotional connection through play and through social interaction. So is it difficult to find that connection? And that doesn't mean, as far as eye contact, because that's not required to have that emotional connection, but is it hard for you to find ways to join in their play, or a sibling to join in their play, or having a hard time figuring out, like, okay, I bought these toys, but they play with it differently than how I would expect them to, and I'm not sure how to teach them that new skill, then that's when an OT can come in and help you figure out how to bridge that gap, and also learn that there's more than one ways to play and build that connection that way. So that's another way that OTs can jump in.
I love that. And since you brought up those lovely milestones, I want to talk about the CDC milestones because they just had an update in February of this year. So I know that there is a lot of controversy surrounding these milestones, whether it's going to help or not help. And especially my concern always is about Black children, because that gap is already wide enough for us. So I just want to get your opinion regarding the CDC milestone updates as an OT.
Yeah, so yes, that has been a really big hot topic within the OT community, within the speech and language community as well. And I think that when it comes to the milestones, they did get some areas right. So they make it very clear that it's not a substitute for a validated screening tool. It's just to provide information to parents and give that conversation starter between talking to the doctor and figuring out how to get those services. And I think before it was more emphasized, like if a child did meet those milestones, or if they didn't meet those milestones, then it was more cut and dry. And at the end of each stage now for the CDC milestones, they have questions to ask about the quality or those smaller things that parents might forget to ask, or that doctors might not notice about the child. And that's one thing I like about that. The crawling, they took that crawling part out, and that is a really important stage when it comes to development. And so that has been one area of concern. But overall, I will say that when it comes to kids that have neurodivergent differences when it comes to kids, when it comes to autistic kids. These milestones are based off neurotypical kids. These milestones are not based on what we might see in the clinic with kids that are autistic. And so even though these changes, I think for many are a bit alarming because they've changed the percentages and they've taken out some milestones and they've squeezed some things together, I think it's important to remember that this is not what therapists use to qualify a child. And it's really more just to be a conversation starter. And so I think more than ever, it's really important to advocate for your child if you have concerns. And there's not any harm in getting evaluated. So regardless of whether a kid is meeting a milestone or not, it's about the quality of it. So you might have a kid that meets all these milestones, but what's the quality look like? Are they, for example, if they even had crawling in there and you ask, okay, are they crawling? And the parent says yes, but maybe they only crawl for a month, or maybe they're only crawling on one side with one arm. So again, going to the quality of it. So just being able to have that conversation with your doctor and say, this is what I want. I have concerns about X, Y, and Z. And I would like to be referred to a PT. I would like to be referred to an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, or a speech therapist. And if not, going to early intervention, because like you said, there is a big gap in access to services when it comes to Black children and non-Black children. And so honestly, regardless of the milestones, it's important to have that advocacy, because the difference is your doctor listening to you? Are they listening to the family? Are they making sure that your concerns are heard? And sometimes, regardless of milestones, families' concerns aren't heard. And so if you have to get a second opinion, don't be afraid to do that. If you have to go directly to early intervention services, if you have to call the clinic directly and say, hey, I have these concerns, can you help with this? They can give you information on how to go further and how to talk to your doctor about it. So that's my 10 cents about that. Like I said, it's a hot topic in the community. So I know they're still tweaking on some stuff, and I think they've gotten a lot of feedback about it, and they might get some changes too. But overall, I think that's the important note.
Listen, Dr. Dime, we are on the same page regarding these milestones. And I know there has been so much concern regarding this. And I tell parents, since this has happened, I was like, look, I've never seen my doctor or a speech therapist or an OT pull out the CDC milestones and go through them to see if my child is going to qualify for a service. There is a much more in-depth process that is going to happen. There's many other evaluations that are going to happen. And the concern really should be within the biases of the evaluation, in my opinion, rather than, the CDC milestones. I think like you, it's a conversation starter. I definitely think it also takes some pressure off of parents of, trying to see certain things. And if it doesn't happen at this time, then, they're alarmed. So I think it takes a little bit of pressure off of parents. But yeah, I think it's a conversation starter. And I think what parents need to be more concerned about is having those conversations with healthcare professionals and being more concerned about biases within that room to make sure their children are being evaluated from a culturally responsive way, rather.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So in talking about being culturally responsive and things of that nature, what should parents be looking for when overcoming the barriers in services and testing?
Ooh, that's a good question. So can you tell me the question again?
Yes. So when it comes to navigating that early intervention system and any of those other systems that, we have to navigate to get these services, what should parents be doing to try to overcome some of those barriers, especially when it comes to services in the testing process? Because we know those are
two difficult processes that's happening.
Yes. Okay. So the first part, we'll look at the therapy services, because you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis for those. So going through that, one way to advocate and make sure, or just to make aware of any biases that might be happening, is to make sure that you get a copy of evaluation forms, have a conversation about how you best learn and what way you might want to receive materials. So sometimes therapists will come in and say, okay, we're going to evaluate your child. Speech, OT, occupational therapy, PT come in, and they all give you all this information all at once. But they might not tell you the goals. They might not tell you any concerns or areas for opportunity to grow. And so having either a written copy or having it emailed to you, making it very clear that you want to be a part of the team, and you're not just going to let any kind of goal or any kind of treatment approach be done to your child. And sometimes either unintentionally or just people they just assume, oh, well, this kid has this diagnosis, or this kid has these characteristics, so we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And so, but you know your child best. And so making it very clear that you want to know what they're doing, how long they're going to do it, what's the treatment approach about it, and being okay with quote unquote, maybe being a helicopter parent, but just making it very clear, like, this is what I want to happen. These are concerns that I also have. Or if you're feeling overwhelmed by it all, I need to take a step to do my own research, and I'll get back with you. Anything that's offered to you is an option. You don't have to do it. You can think about it. You can say, what are some exercises or activities I can do in the meantime while we process this, because it is a process. That is one way to overcome those things. And honestly, I've had families before as well ask the service coordinator, how diverse are the staff? Do you have any therapists of color that my child might connect with more? And just taking note of that as well. How does your child respond to those that he's working with, and making sure that it's a good fit that way, and not being afraid, if it's available, not being afraid to switch and make sure it's the best fit for you and the best fit for your child as well.
Thank you for that. I love the empowerment in that answer, and definitely asking, how diverse the staff is. Because I know we ran into an issue with an OT where their tools were not what we would use in our home. So the hairbrush wasn't a match. And, that's also what we as healthcare providers should be aware of, is that tools are not universal sometimes, right? And that we have to make sure that our toolkit and our toolbox is culturally relevant to the people that we're serving, right? Because my daughter could not relate to that hairbrush because it's not something that we would use for our hair. And we all know how important our hair is in the Black community. So, that's just a little tidbit I want to throw in there for those who may be listening.
Exactly. And when it comes to the evaluation, if you are ready for your child to be tested and to see if they have a diagnosis, sometimes depending on where you are, there can be long waiting lists. It comes with a mountain of paperwork. And so looking to see if the clinics in your area have resources on more than one clinic in the area, because one service might have 3 months and another service might say, okay, we can take you in 2 weeks. And so even if you're referred to one person, not being afraid to ask and say, okay, are there other options available for my child to get tested? Because we don't want to wait 3 to 6 months or, 6 to 12 months for an evaluation. So just knowing, I think the biggest part is knowing that you have options, even when those biases come up. If people assume things, a lot of times when you have a family come in, some therapists might just assume, okay, either A, they're not familiar with autism, or two, just sometimes in healthcare in general, people don't check their biases at the door. Mm-hmm. And so regardless of that, just knowing that you have options and you have the right to decide what's best for your child. And even if someone is an expert in something, you're the expert in your child. So that trumps whatever they have to say.
Amen to that. I'm always about that. I'm letting parents know left and right, do not feel intimidated by professionals, because you have an expertise as well. And that is expertise in your child, because you're with them more than we as professionals. So thank you for, reiterating that for us. So in moving on, I know sensory processing is a big thing, especially when we're talking to OTs. So can you talk about how sensory processing and behavior go hand in hand?
Sure. So sensory processing is the foundation to basically how we operate. Those are major senses. So what we look at, what we touch, what we taste, how we feel movement, how we feel where our body is, whether our eyes are open or closed, that is the foundation. So if there is a difference in how we process that information, it's going to be harder to do any higher level skills. So for example, if I have a hard time with my body awareness, I have a hard time sensing where I am in space, then it's going to be hard for me to sit up in my chair. If it's hard for me to sit up in my chair and someone asks me to do a writing assignment and just stay seated the whole time, but I kind of feel like I'm floating in my chair, then I might try to get up, or I might try to do something else. I might fall out of my chair. And so to others, I might look like a behavior, but really it's a response. So I think they go hand in hand as far as sensory processing might be the foundation, it might be the call, and then the behavior is the response. So it's how it's perceived, or it's how a child chooses to respond to how they feel or how they don't feel their environment.
Perfect. Thank you. I know that actually reminds me of a struggle I had with in regards to my son in the school. He has a lot of sensory behaviors. So he's a sensory seeker. And that's just my way of putting it, because I'm not an OT, y'all. So if I'm saying it wrong, I'm sorry.
Saying it right.
So he is, a sensory seeker. And so his body is always moving. And we know that, some schools are not hip on that. Okay. They have a problem if your child is constantly moving. So we have a lot of accommodations for him. So we have like a yoga ball, he gets, sensory breaks, all of these things. But they kept saying, he's standing sometimes when he's doing his work. And, it really took my lawyer to get involved with the team. And she was like, well, what's the harm in him standing? If he's not bothering anybody and he's doing his work, why is it a issue with you if he's standing, if he needs that, if his body needs to be standing at that time? So I think oftentimes schools are not understanding of what that body needs, that the sensory seeking that sometimes our children need when they have neurodivergence.
Right, exactly. And it's a shame that it has to come to that, because like what you said, I've heard that several times before, where parents say, well, I had to get my advocate involved, or I had to get my lawyer involved to get, just those basic accommodations for my child. And a part of it goes into people not recognizing that you should treat a child how you would treat yourself. So if I'm in a class and I'm tired of sitting, then I might go stand and go to the back of the class, or I might pull out some gum, or I might turn in my chair some or get a bathroom break, I'm going to make accommodations for myself. And so when we don't make accommodations for those kids, then they're either going to make accommodations for themselves, or you're going to see those behaviors come out because we're not doing what we would do for them. We're not doing that as we would already do that for ourselves in the first place.
Thank you. And moving on to the last topic I want to hit on in regards to co-regulation. I know for me as a mental health therapist, I've kind of always thought as co-regulation is something that, we're helping children with, or we're helping individuals with mental health wise. So when you were talking about regulation and things of that nature, you hit on it just a little bit earlier. I definitely wanted to hear how that is incorporated into OT, because that's some new information for me. And I know a lot of our listeners are not aware of that as well. So can you talk about the power of co-regulation when it comes to OT services?
Yes, for sure. So when I talk about co-regulation, it also goes into self-regulation. And so that has to be developed. So kids and young children don't start out with self-regulation. When you're born, you have that skin-to-skin contact, and you have that lactation time or that bottle feeding time with that closeness to your caregiver. And then you feel your caregiver's heartbeat, and that helps regulate the baby's heartbeat. And as the baby grows, either from the sound of their voice or from rocking, that movement, having that close emotional connection, the baby learns how to fall asleep, the baby learns how to calm down. And the same thing goes into early childhood, school age kids, and until they develop a way to self-regulate. And so with co-regulation, it can be so powerful for our kids because we're giving them a sense of safety. For so many kids, they can be sensory seekers. They can have a lot of sensory sensitivities, whether it is sensitivity to sounds, sounds that other people might not be able to hear, itchy clothes, just being able to process more than one voice when everyone's talking at once. It can be a lot going on that can be very overwhelming for kids all day long. And it can be very easy for them to get to that point of either having a meltdown or having a behavior that harms themselves or harms others unintentionally, just from that frustration. And so the power of co-regulation is when kids go really high and they're really anxious and they're really overwhelmed, we can go really low. We can be very calm. We can make sure that they're safe. We can make sure that they have the opportunity to either come to us if that will calm them down, or if they need space, to have that space to calm down. So having that model to learn how to do that deep breathing, how to go through that process of being so escalated to, okay, recognizing I'm in a safe space, I'm around a safe person that is not going to place any further demands on me. They're just there to help me get to that place where I'm not in a fight or flight position.
I love that. And I think it's so important because as adults, when we are interacting with children, if they are heightened, sometimes we match that how heightened they are. And that is just going to make them more anxious or heighten the behaviors. But if we regulate our own emotions in that instance, they are oftentimes able to model that as well, or get to a point where they are able to express how they're feeling. So I love that you are hitting home on co-regulation. It's so important. Now, is there anything that we didn't cover that you think that people need to know when it comes to OT services or autism and OT services?
Okay, so when it comes to autism and occupational therapy, I think that it is just so important to know that there's so much power in play and so much power in that emotional connection. And so having someone to collaborate with, someone who has that expertise in child development and in sensory processing, and just that overall arch of how our environment and a person and what's important to them, how they all connect together, having that person to collaborate with, the occupational therapist, you can find ways to just discover more about your child. And there's so much, because we primarily work through play, there's so much that goes into it. So not being afraid to be silly or do things that you didn't expect, and realizing that from that emotional connection, you can build off that. You can build into new skills, into emerging skills, and you can create things in a way that is child-led and not in a way where we're forcing compliance in any way. So that's just something I wanted to bring up, is that it's really beautiful when you see that connection and you see a kid learn new skills from that connection, and not from us forcing them to sit or forcing them to play a certain way or not line things up. There's so much beauty in seeing a kid for everything that they are.
I absolutely love that. One of my good friends, more like my sister, is a play therapist, and she has taught me so much about the power of play. But I really love what you're saying, and I think it goes for parents and for professionals, because a lot of times as professionals we can get so caught up in that compliance as well, and not understanding that what the child is showing us can be a different way. Like you were saying, there's so many different ways to play with one toy. So it doesn't have to be my way. Your way can be just as valid. So I love, how you're really empowering people to do something different within the field. And I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So where can the people find you? Because I know they're going to be running to try to get an appointment, get some information. Where can they find you? Because I'm going to be right up in your inbox too. So where can the people find you?
Yes, you can find me. I am on Instagram at a dime of OT. And I also have a blog that's coming out as well. And that is called A Dime of OT. You can find that through my Instagram, or type in adimeinot.com. I also have an Instagram page full of OT activities for you to try, and different strategies when it comes to sensory processing, to regulation, feeding strategies as well, and fine motor skills. And that is at Watch Them Glow. And finally, I'm also a part of a company called Amira's Mamas, and that deals with self-care for parents, especially new parents, but just parents in general. And that is at Amira's Mamas with an E. So that is me.
Perfect. And we will have all of those links in the show notes as well. Dr. Diamond, thank you for being on the podcast. We appreciate you so much for giving us this knowledge, because I know I left with plenty that I didn't know before. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being on here with you.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. See you on the next episode. If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autisminblack.org/podcast. And be sure to share your takeaways from the show on IG stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find them and share them. And if you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, make sure to join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community. And please make sure to answer the questions to gain entry. Thank you for listening and joining me this week. Have a good one.